Cheaters are everywhere, and since we live in a world where everyone is married and divorced, it's not just singles or widows who need to figure out how to spot a cheater, it's all couples who have committed to another person. Why do so many marriages fail? I think you can get some idea from this story. Today's story is about Opus was so angry. I'll tell you why. It all started about 5 weeks ago when Opus' wife started to change, like a chameleon in front of his eyes. She began to refuse intimacy. That made him suspicious immediately. Okay, let's go to the story and see what she did in their marriage. My name is Jonathan. I had never been this angry before in my life. My anger is a kind of anger that nobody should have to deal with. I wanted to kick 2 people at the moment. Why am I so angry? I'll tell you why. It all started about 5 weeks ago when my wife started to change, like a chameleon in front of my eyes. She began to refuse intimacy. And that intimacy included things husbands and wives do in bed together. That made me suspicious immediately, since I'd once had a girlfriend who had cheated on me, and when that all came out, I'd learned some painful lifelong lessons. I never mentioned the first bish to the now second bish in my life. Don't know it would have made a difference anyway. On the 2nd week of her change, I decided to investigate further. I'm not a guy who takes his problems to a pie, or someone else to help solve. Nope. I'm one of those hands-on guys, and I handle my own issues quite well, thank you very much. I followed her from her workplace at lunchtime. When she pulled into that motel parking space and walked briskly right to room 104, I knew she was cheating on me. Her job didn't involve dealing with customers out of the workplace at all. Matter of fact, she didn't deal at all with customers since she worked in the record-keeping department. That first discovery caused me pain, but not near the pain that her taunts, cuts, and slights had already caused me. The man she met was a co-worker of hers. Of sorts, he worked in a different department. I had heard he was in the quick-rising circle, and that he was headed up the ladder rapidly. After seeing them meet 3 times in 2 weeks, I decided how I was going to approach this issue head on. I'm too cheap to pay good money out to find out an already known factor, so I just waited until now, knowing that just behind this door my wife was in the arms of another man. I won't kick them. I kept repeating that to myself in the hopes I wouldn't kick them. It was going to be a very close thing. I had to confront them, and I had to get the pictures. In this state, I could still sue for alienation of affection. And her employer would be getting hit hard too, for allowing it to happen as it did. My guess was that Mr. on the way up was soon to be on the way out. I needed the pictures, and then I needed to serve the soon-to-be ex-wife the divorce papers. The locks on our house were being changed as I stood here, the locksmith having been paid by me just before I left home. I had moved all our money around and split it evenly. I had canceled all our credit cards. I had done many things over the last 2 weeks, and now the final turmoil was about to begin. I am not certain how Simone will react. It is my thought that she will be happy instead of upset. However, she may feel quite guilty in a few minutes too. Of course, my lawyer, who's had a lot of experience with divorce, told me the guilt will pass as soon as she gets her own lawyer. Do I love her, you may ask? Well, right now I hate her fully and openly. At the same time, I'm in a deep inner fight with myself, thinking that she really loves me and this is just a mistake on her part. Poor judgment. And we may fix things. Logically, I know it won't happen though. I can't accept a wife who would cheat on me. There is not 1 ounce of trust left in my being for her. The love that I still have for her is just that part which hasn't had time to accept this sudden and complete change happening in such a short while. Update. The manager of the motel handed me the key to the room. A $100 bill and a promise to not mess up the place served as the gateway to having the key in hand. He's a nice guy, and I'm sure it's not his fault my wife and her lover chose this place for their trysts. He also mentioned something about his ex-wife and how there were some similarities between us. Inserting the key, I opened the door quietly. Moving into the room, I closed the door almost all the way, leaving it cracked just a bit. I aimed the camera and stepped into the room fully. I love this digital camera, I thought to myself. I'm sure glad she gave it to me for my birthday 3 months ago. She was screaming at the guy to get off her. He was pissed and moving to get up. I took several more pictures, seeing her hard ... Simone was crying, trying to cover up while he did the stupid thing. I had secretly hoped he would, and his choice made my next move quite natural. Who are you? Get the duck out of here before I kick your ass. Who I am as her soon-to-be ex, whose ass is going to be kicked is debatable. I don't think you're going to kick my ass. I moved to one side as he approached, setting the camera down and turning just a bit to the right. I let him come up on my left. Letting go of the camera, I began to turn rapidly, and in so doing, swung my arm up and hard. My fist connected with ... His feet lifted up off the floor with the force of all my anger, pain, and just a tad of fear. I was afraid I was going to kick this stupid and he just wasn't worth it. I must have been quite angrier than I thought. I bent over and checked him for a pulse. There was a pulse, so I relaxed. I heard Simone going on and on about something, and now I turned to face her. She suddenly shut up, fear choking her voice. I knew that she'd never seen me this way before, and I must have looked far different from the man she had left at breakfast this morning. Well, whore, hope you enjoy this shit. He's going to be yours from now on. I sure don't want anything to do with your cheatingness anymore. She sat there, tears running down her face, shaking and hugging herself. She couldn't look me in the eye, something I noticed had been occurring more and more lately. Now though, she knew that I knew. Now she knew the game was up. She glanced at me standing over her lover and I'd seen her shiver. Her eyes didn't stay on me very long though. Here are the typical papers which are served in situations like this. I'm suing for divorce. The locks on the house have been changed. I've set up a bank account with your half of everything. You're served. We're through. Thanks for nothing. The papers landed on her knees, which were half out of the sheet she was trying to hide under. She looked at them and then looked into my eyes. She said nothing. For the first time in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I felt nothing. Two kinds of nothing were going on in that room. Mine was going to be far more painful in the end. But right now, she knew there was nothing she could say to make things right between us. I even got the feeling that she may not know how to make things right, and that us hadn't existed for a longer time than these last weeks. I turned and left, hearing her plead with me as I went out the door. Wait, let me explain. Please, Jonathan, please. I kept walking. I couldn't let her see my eyes right then. They were full. Tears were welling up in them, and I knew that if I turned I'd weaken in my whole plan. There was too much water under the bridge and I had too many issues now to want to do that. What had once been, now was nevermore. Arriving home I found the locksmith patiently waiting. He'd changed all 3 entry locks and the garage door opener had been reprogrammed. I thanked him for doing the job on such short notice and tipped him a 20. Inside the house that had been a home, I sat at the kitchen table and thought over our years together. I didn't know why Simone changed or why she suddenly decided I was less than what she evidently had originally seen in me. I didn't know one reason why she had done this. I did know that we were done. I did know that in 5 weeks the pain and words had made me a different man. But obviously Simone missed that change while it was occurring, just as I had missed the changes in her too. The phone rang. Looking at the caller ID I saw it was Simone's mom. I answered. John, what's going on? Simone came over here in tears saying that she'd ruined your marriage. What's happened? Well, Doris, it's like this. Simone will have to tell you what happened. But suffice it to say that I found her at a motel room today and served her the divorce papers. Why, John? I don't understand this at all. Look, I'm really sorry, Doris. You know that I love you and Sam with all my heart and this whole thing is tough on all of us. But it has to be this way. I had tears running down my cheeks now. I truly loved Simone's parents. They'd been very good to me over the years Simone and I had been together, and hearing the pain and confusion in Doris's voice cut my soul. I was glad that this was taking place over the phone. I didn't want them to see me like this. John, can't you two work it out somehow? I don't think so, Doris. This is a biggie, a seriously huge biggie. And it's one of those biggies that destroy everything. The silence on the other end of the phone told me that Doris was trying to cope with such hard and fast news. I felt for her. Since just last night we'd had dinner with Doris and Sam, and Simone was all lovey-dovey while in front of her parents. The whole show had been surprising to me. We'd fought on the way there, and of course I got the cold shoulder on the way home ... But while at Doris and Sam's, we'd been the perfect little couple. I didn't allow our fight to show to prevent Sam from being hurt by his daughter's actions, but it appeared I should have warned them somehow before taking the actions I just had. Sam's health wasn't all that good, and the years of working in hard jobs combined with the smoking he'd done led to his current health being so poor. Doris was in good health, but always worrying about Sam, so I felt bad about having not given them some kind of heads up on all this mess. Update 1. Few days later my phone rang again. I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Simone's father. I replied. John, I need to tell you something about my daughter's stupid relationship. Simone told her mother everything last night, and I was there too. Can we meet? I want to share with you exactly what happened to her. I really loved Simone's parents, so I agreed. This is Simone's conversation with her mother as told to me by her father when we met. Well, Simone, I'm your mother, and John, on the other hand, is like my son. I'm sorry to hear that John gave you divorce papers. You have to tell me what happened. It's not enough to tell how John found you in a motel room. I want to know the details. Why are you in the motel and who are you with? Mom, we weren't getting along as well as we had been when first married. Jonathan had been busy at his work, working on several projects. We had talked about it, since it was cutting into our personal lives so much. I knew that in a few months all the hard work would more than likely pay off with a nice promotion. Meanwhile, at my job, Greg had found that I'd messed up on some employee records. It wasn't a huge mistake, but it was a serious error on my part and could have cost me my next promotion and raise, as well as caused me to be held back for the foreseeable future. Greg, being the kind of man he is, used that information and for all practical purposes blackmailed me into meeting him at lunch one day. That turned into a sexual favor for one time to prevent me from suffering for all the issues surrounding my mistake. While not thrilled about it all, the one thing that allowed me to do such a thing was the fact that John and I hadn't been getting along well, nor had we had much sex in the last 6 months. I didn't realize it until that first meeting between Greg and I, but I had also been feeling I was missing out on some things that other people had experienced in life. Jonathan had been my one and only. I'd never been with any man other than him, ever. That first time with Greg was in his office during lunch. Everyone left as usual, and I'd hung back. Greg was waiting for me, and he'd even brought in a small bottle of my favorite wine, along with some cheese and crackers. Our lunch times were usually an hour, with everyone going to local restaurants or street vendors to eat. I'd usually go to the street vendor and buy something quick off the cart and then go sit in solitude at the park. We weren't missed at all that first day. Greg had turned out to be nicer than the mean old blackmailer I'd thought. That first time was kind of a letting go for me too. After that day I discovered I wanted it more, even though I knew it was wrong. Even though I still loved my husband. Greg treated me like, I don't know, maybe his property, or something. With him I could let go and be someone else totally. By the end of that lunch I had done some things with Greg I'd never done with my husband. We'd barely been able to get things straightened out before the others got back, and I'd left his office not feeling as angry towards him as I had when it all started. Later that day as I tasted him on my lips, I found myself thinking about the next time. It was a sudden, unbidden thought. And it told me that I wanted Greg again. Greg also wanted more than the one time too. He approached me the next day about it, and we once more did the office thing. I heard him begin to say things about Jonathan that day. Negative little slights. During the next 2 weeks the pattern emerged that while we were doing it, Greg would say terrible things about Jonathan. He even intimated that Jonathan had to be cheating on me. With the way things were in our lives at home, I pretty soon took Greg's attitude. Over the weeks I started to belittle and run down Jonathan to everyone except you and Dad. I feared that you and Dad would see right through me, so I tried to be the dutiful, loving little wife while you and Dad were around. So now, just before the motel trysts evolved, Jonathan and I were on the outs. Greg and I had gone from having sex to a full-blown affair. Greg had mentioned that the motel would be the better way for us to keep meeting until we could figure out something else. His wife was getting suspicious and he thought that someone at work may have mentioned to her that we seemed to be together a bit too much, considering that we worked in different departments. We had never talked about leaving our spouses. It never came up. We were just meeting for the sex. I should have seen that with Jonathan there was love. Love, respect, and understanding. I gave that up for sex. Sex and lust. Greg ordered and took what he wanted, and I gave it up to him with little or no fight. Jonathan had respected me, and would never have taken anything without my agreeing to it completely. Greg could take from me and order me because he had no love there for me. He just had this little slot he could get whatever he wanted from, while his wife gave him the emotional support he needed. I, on the other hand, had taken Greg's banter about Jonathan to heart and cut my emotional support with my husband in favor of having the sexual high I had with Greg. Looking back, I know now I made the biggest mistake of my life 10 weeks ago, and there is no going back and fixing it now. When Jonathan stepped into the room that day I was shocked. I tried to hide. I tried to get Greg off me. By the time Greg got up I looked at John's face and saw a stranger. There was a look in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Jonathan started to shoot the pictures of us. Greg got off the bed saying something I didn't catch, while Jonathan calmly turned and put the digital camera on the table next to where he was standing. The next second stunned me. I saw Greg start towards Jonathan, threatening him. The next thing I saw was Greg flying up about 2 feet into the air, then landing on his back. Jonathan's eyes found mine and I couldn't look at him anymore. I tried to cover myself up, burrowing into the sheet. Jonathan called me a whore and tossed some folded papers on the bed. I heard something about papers, divorce, being served. I looked at the sheets of the bed, not knowing if my husband was going to beat me too or not. I was scared and embarrassed, and, most of all, ashamed. Jonathan suddenly turned and started walking out, having grabbed the camera from the table. I cried out to him. I can't remember what I said, but I remember thinking that whatever it was it must have sounded so hollow. Afterwards I took a long shower. I never checked on Greg. I didn't care if he was dead or not. The motel manager came by and checked on the room. That's when I found out Jonathan had bought a key from him. That manager looked at me like I was dirt. He said that he'd caught his wife with another man in a room just like Jonathan had, and that was the only real reason he'd given Jonathan the key. He told me I'd really screwed up. He didn't need to tell me. I knew. I'd just thrown away the best thing I'd ever had in my life. All because I got caught up in my little affair and thought I had something special. The following day she showed up at work and there were 3 men in my office waiting for her. The president, the human resources manager, and some guy who she think was the company lawyer. I was asked how Greg and I had gotten together. I explained everything. I held nothing back. I could see the looks on my co-workers' faces as they walked by the office, the same as when I walked in that morning, and I knew I'd be gone by the end of the day. I was wrong about that though. First, the HR guy made sure that the first time I was with Greg was blackmail of sorts, and then they made me sign some papers about Greg and me. I was out of the office and on the street before lunch. The company wouldn't allow me to work there, but since Greg had blackmailed me to begin with, they had to give me severance pay. Other than that, I was out. Greg was escorted out by building security and right into the hands of the police. Evidently, he'd been up to something else and it all came out during questioning. Greg was in deep, very deep. I found out later that Greg had been stealing from the company here and there. Usually it was small amounts or a bit of fast work on receipts from traveling and stuff. Altogether it had added up to enough to charge him with grand larceny. Greg's wife left him, taking their 3 kids and moving home to her parents' house back east. Greg was in jail awaiting trial. I was asked to testify at first, but when the DA and I talked, she realized that my testimony would probably hurt more than help, so they decided to not use me. The lawyer for Greg asked me if I'd testify on Greg's behalf. After I told him what I'd say about how Greg had originally blackmailed me into sex, and then how he'd worked the wedge between my husband and me, he too decided I was not going to be any use on the stand. Mom, I really don't know how I managed to make that things like I did. Simone, you have made the worst mistake you could have ever made. You let not only your mom and dad down, let yourself down, but you let your husband down too. You, young lady, have totally destroyed 2 marriages and your husband's love. Lo, you have become the lowest of the low. I still love you, since you're my daughter, but now I have absolutely no respect for you. Sam let me know that Doris and Sam let Simone move in with them. He sounded lost. That brought tears to my eyes too. They were good people, and I felt bad that they'd been caught up in this mess. Update 2. I knew that had I warned her parents though, Simone would have got some kind of warning and I'd never have gotten the pictures I needed. Well, I didn't actually need them for court unless her lawyer copped an attitude on us. If her lawyer copped the attitude, then the pictures would be laid on the table along with sworn testimony from 6 different individuals about their affair. I call it an affair with reservation. I'm not sure Simone was in love with this guy or even if she had participated initially of her own free will. Her father's statements had indicated that Greg's held something over Simone's head at the start of the whole thing. My lawyer was having a heyday with the case being presented to Simone's employer. That case had been presented and filed while I was preparing to visit the motel room. He'd filed in court and then within 20 minutes was on the phone with the company lawyers. They were excited to say the least. They were also in denial, of course, but he mentioned the sworn statements and suddenly the company had a whole different take on things. I knew from what my lawyer told me that Simone and Lover and any others involved were more than likely to be terminated from their jobs the next day, barring any reasonable excuse for their behavior. I knew that the case for alienation of affection against Greg was strong from his employer's actions. We had the sworn statements from 3 of his and 1 of her co-workers about them sneaking around at work and getting it on. There had been speculation by supervisors at the company about them as well, yet nobody said anything to them or me. We also had sworn affidavits from the motel owner, and a cleaning lady as well. 6 witnesses of sorts, in my pictures to ensure proof that there were in fact sexual liaisons happening on company time. Their using the motel had come about to alleviate the attentions of co-workers. Greg had evidently figured out that they were becoming too noticeable. He also knew about the company policies on things like workplace romance. My lawyer had gotten lots of info. We also had their company policy on workplace ethics, actions, and relationships in printed form. I discovered that Simone and the jerk had been together for a bit more than 5 weeks by the point I figured out things weren't right. So, Simone had been running around on me for just over 10 weeks in total by the time I visited them at the motel. By finding out 5 weeks prior had been one of those most difficult times in my life. I'd had 3 of them so far, and by now I hoped I'd never have another as long as I lived. Leaving the motel room, that day was the numbest I'd ever been. Simone was still on the bed, in tears. Greg was still out cold. The manager of the motel met me outside in the hallway. I handed him the key. He placed his hand on my shoulder in a kindly way. It's tough right now, but it will get better. Move on, find yourself and then find someone else. You'll be okay. I won't lie to you, it's going to be painful for a while yet. Depends on how much you loved her and how much you cared for her. Thanks, I figured out that. Final update, Simone didn't contest a thing about the divorce. It went smooth as silk. My lawyer was surprised, as was hers too, I think. She had no fight left in her at all. I could tell she was suffering. But at least she never tried to excuse what she'd done. Once the divorce was over, the case against her former employer finished up. They just wanted me to go away, and they were willing to pay my lawyer fees, court costs, and a tidy sum just to make sure I did. Since then, Simone has been having a hard time. Alone, out of work, and living with parents who have changed dramatically because of her actions is stressful. The brand of imposter hangs over her head, and it will take a long time to get rid of it. Although she can start a new life, I hope that eventually she will be able to get on with life and have this pain every hour. I hope she at least learned a painful lesson. Time will tell. Greg went to jail. I relish that for the moment. Now he'd get to know other forms of sex, hopefully on the receiving end this time. I have no sympathy for him. He's not a man, he's a nothing, at least to me. He had 3 kids and a wife. I met her once during the turmoil of the divorce. She was a looker too. What a stupid Greg was. He'd had it all, and tossed it away because of some kind of sexual thrill he must have felt he couldn't get from her. I turned in my resignation. My employers were stunned. They worked hard to try to convince me not to quit, but I had too many issues to be able to continue to work there effectively. They did what they could. Then once they knew I was gone, they offered me a nice letter of recommendation which I accepted. I have a new job on the West Coast. I moved out here about a year ago. I met a nice young lady. She's a keeper. I'm still confused in the trust department, but she has an ex-husband who cheated on her, so there's a common ground between us. Life has been a reality check, but I think things are on the mend. By reaction, Simone's parents were hurt the most. Her mother's words forever etched in Simone's brain. Should Simone have fought with Greg and pressured him to reveal what he had over her? But she didn't. She might miss her husband and wish she could never go where she went. We know it's too late. She has to stay with the cheater brand. That's what she did. I've heard people say, once a cheater, always a cheater. Now she lives knowing that she is a fraud. I wish that every woman should be satisfied by her own husband. Otherwise, if she is unlucky and caught like Simone, she will have to live with the cheating brand for the rest of her life. Thank you for joining us on Revolving Time, where we bring you real-life stories that explore the complexities of the human experience. We hope that our stories have provided you with insights, inspiration, and a renewed appreciation for the power of human resilience. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and stay connected with our community. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories and events, and you'll have access to a library of inspiring content. Thank you for being a part of our journey, and we look forward to sharing more powerful stories with you in the future.